Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Hello, and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar entitled Smart Trader Desktops, Placing the UX at the Front and Center of the Trading Workflow. My name is Mike O'Hara. I'm an editorial contributor at A-Team Group, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our expert panel, Stephen A. Smith, who's a product management lead and strategy at Bank of America, Louis Blackburn, lead product designer, Lloyd's and founder of the Frontier Studio, and Ivan Kunyankin, data science team lead at DevExperts, who are kindly sponsoring today's webinar. So good afternoon, gents. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves in a moment. But before we start, I'd just like to bring to the attention of the audience a couple of things that are available from the A-Team Group, which you'll see here at the bottom of the page and on this slide, which you should now be seeing. First of all, on the 6th of November this year, there's a webinar we're running, Trade the Middle East and North Africa, Connectivity, Data Systems and Processes. Next year, 27th of February 2025, the Trading Tech Summit London will be coming back for its 14th year. Been going a while. And also, we've just recently published our Regulatory Data Handbook 2024, the 12th edition of that. So you can register for either of the events or download the handbook by clicking the appropriate ad. Also, just a couple of logistical points before we get started for our audience on how you can participate in today's webinar. To the right of the video, you'll see a box there with questions and polls. We'll be running 2 polls during the webinar, so please do vote as it helps us gauge industry opinion, and I'll let you know when those polls are coming up. If you do have any questions for the panelists, we'll be looking at those throughout the webinar, and we'll be aiming to address as many of them as possible towards the end. So please do feel free to add your question to the box under the questions tab. And I believe on Slido there's a capability to vote questions up if you think it's a particularly good question that somebody else has asked. So without further ado, let me hand over to our speakers to introduce themselves. And if you can just spend a minute or so, Stephen, introducing yourself, who you are and what you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, my name is Stephen Smith. I currently work at Bank of America, and I drive the what we call the global markets desktop strategy here. So I have been involved in building digital products for traders for quite a while now, and I've basically spent most of my career on the trading desk building user-centered applications, whether actually we're back end or front end. So I'm very excited to be talking about UX today.
Excellent, thank you. And Louis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Louis. I have a bit of a varied background, I guess. I've spent most of the past sort of 10, 11 years in the financial services industry, but started out as a software engineer at JP Morgan at the on the FX trading desk, supporting traders do their day-to-day tasks and building out some of the underlying infrastructure for the trading systems and trade booking and risk management. And then made us a shift into user experience design. So I gradually kind of went from the back end closer and closer to the front end, got involved with front end development, and then eventually made a full shift into UX design. So, which has been my world for the last well, 5-6 years or so. So at the moment I'm at Lloyd's, where I'm currently working under the Scottish Widows brand, but before that I was also at a startup in the asset management space where we were building a software as a service platform for asset managers, fund managers, and a lot of that was heavily user-centric, involved in sort of understanding their needs, and it was quite a difficult challenge that we were trying to solve. But yeah, long story short, that's my my whistle-stop tour of my history, and yeah, I'm excited to be.
No, thanks, Louis, and I'm sure you'll have some interesting insights into this discussion. And Ivan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Mike, and I'm glad to be here today. I've been doing machine learning for a little over 6 years now, last 3 of which I spent working on AI applications for the fintech domain. And in DevExpress, I lead a team of data scientists focused on building this actionable conversational assistant platform for brokers and funded trading firms, and also on trading data analysis and risk management solutions. Our platform called Devexa was designed with the end user in mind. So I'd be glad to tell everyone about our journey today. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, thanks for the intros, gents. So before we get into the discussion, maybe we can start with our first audience poll. If we can get that up on the screen, hopefully people should be able to see that in a moment. And the question for the audience is, what do you see as the biggest challenge in implementing a user-friendly trading platform? And I guess this is, from the perspective of somebody who's developing it, or from the perspective of a user. So is the biggest challenge, do you think, is cost, technical complexity, user resistance to change, lack of clear UX strategy, or something else? So please do vote in that poll, and we will now move into the discussion. We'll look at the results of that poll a little bit later on. So Stephen, I'll come to you first while the audience answers that question. From your experience at Bank of America, how does UX influence the efficiency and decision-making process of traders, do you think? And I'd be interested if you're able to share any kind of specific examples of where UX enhancements have led to tangible benefits.
Yeah, let me take a quick step back on this one. So UX in the consumer world is a given. UX in the trading world is not, and that's been my experience throughout my career. And I think the main difference is, in consumer world, if you want your users to stay on the platform and keep using it, UX has to be spot on. A trader has to use this trading platform. Now, having said this, where UX is the most important is in this decision making, right? The idea is we want to go from decision making to action with no friction. And so that's actually very hard to do. It may be very easy in kind of the actual trading aspect of things. Speed obviously is the essence of this. But I have quite a few examples I want to talk about. Maybe I'll just talk about one of a I'm going to say a challenge that we got and a really good result that came out of it. That was pure about really understanding the decision making. And I think that's the issue when you don't have a UX designer or a UX kind of practice, is we build the requirements that fits the framework that we have technically or the roadmap that we have from a product standpoint, but we don't always think about the decision making. So I was on electronic trading floor a long time ago, and as you can imagine, there's tons of trading happening there, lots of orders, and so everything is event-based. Alerting system is the core of the trading system, and so we built this thing. It was incredible, like completely. The users wanted full customization. They wanted to put sounds on the alerts, parameterize the alerts, color the alerts, and it worked fantastically. But we started seeing some things happening in outages. A lot of the important alerts got flooded out, but also some of the things that are in the path of the trade that had to be actioned got forgotten. And we were like, how is it? Like, these have a high priority, they're in red. And we went to use it. It's like, well, okay, this red, but also like, this new client came in, big client, I want to see the new order, I put that alert in red. And suddenly with alerting, especially, as soon as you dilute an alert, it is gone. People do not look at it again. So it's very lesson number one. And so we got back to the drawing board. It's like, okay, we gave everything the user wanted, yet we're not getting the desired outcomes, right? And so, we came up with a solution that actually the traders hated to start with when it was on paper. And what we said is, you have your super duper alert platform here. You can customize everything. In your trading system, at the top, we're going to have one panel. You can't do anything there, and it always has to be black. There can't be anything in there. And basically, all of the alerts that, as a group, as a desk, we decided had to be action, went in there. There was no parameterization, nothing there. And so, but the goal is like, it should always be empty. There should never be an alert there. If there's an alert there, somebody has to action it now. And so we kind of took the decision making of, it's like, is this an important alert or not, out of the hand to get the outcome that we wanted, right? And again, no friction between decision making to action. And so the clear result we got, first of all, we didn't get any errors anymore, whether we had to pay the client because we didn't pick up their orders for one reason or another. And two, all of these important alerts, the ones that were in the path of the trade, were basically picked up in less than 5 seconds, right? Because the whole desk came along. And an interesting UX thing happened here where too, it's like, oh, we're not just talking about the user as a persona, we started using about the desk as a persona. So, which was also kind of interesting thing. So again, as a solution, it was a little weird because we kind of go away from, I'm going to say, classic UX principle, but the outcome and the behavior that we wanted was there and very good.
Interesting. So I guess a key lesson there is that there has to be a certain element of standardization, particularly for things like alerts, because otherwise they can get lost. And if everything is too kind of custom to each user, then you're left with a bit of a mess, basically.
Yeah, bit of a mess. And an interesting thing too is once somebody was on holiday and somebody else wanted to back up that trader, well, suddenly their alerts were customized in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So we again, great system, didn't quite work out the way we wanted it.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. So let me come to you, Ivan. DevExperts, obviously, you work with various financial institutions. I'd be interested to get your take on how different types of clients, such as retail versus institutional, we've already talked about the kind of the consumer space being very different to the institutional space. But particularly on the institutional side, how do they prioritize the UX within their trading workflows? Do you find kind of unique challenges for the institutional versus the retail side?
Well, it's a great question. Let me, how to say, gently scratch the surface by first saying that usually UX is taken seriously by both, because it's not always about just liking the experience. It's about often getting stuff done. And overall, some aspects are equally important to both, like stability, performance, and safety. However, some elements, they are valued differently. For retail, for example, it is important to support different platforms, and I mean desktop, web, mobile. For brokers, it is also crucial to maintain accessibility, and personalization is considered a must recently. So it is also important not to overcomplicate things. So for institutional clients, on the other hand, they value functional components more. For example, specific features and handling high load would be more important than visual impression and sometimes even accessibility due to the smaller and sometimes more involved audience. So overall, I think that ensuring a good user experience is a challenge regardless. It's never a one-size-fits-all solution, and the context of the client sometimes brings more challenges than what type of a client it is.
Yeah. And I guess on the institutional side also, you're typically working with much more screen real estate than you have on the retail side, because you look at any trading room and there's typically screens everywhere. Yeah. Louis, how important is uncovering and addressing assumptions during the user research and discovery part of the UX design process? I know this is a hot topic for you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think when most people think about, user experience or UX design, there's a tendency to think about that usability aspect. How easy is it for you to click on this button and go to this place, or how easy is it for you to perform a particular task? But actually, user experience as a discipline is quite a broad remit of sort of interest. So that first part of discovery and really understanding what it is that your users are trying to do, what is it that their needs are, what are their pain points, that whole process is part of the user experience discipline. And so it's almost like you've pretty much got these kind of two perspectives. The first one being you want to build the right thing. So, we've all been on projects where people have built something, we spent months and months churning it out, and then it's not used by anybody because they don't see any value in it. So it helps you mitigate that. But then the other side of things is the building the thing right aspect of the perspective, and that's that usability piece and making sure people can actually use whatever it is that you've built. So yeah, I'm keen to, wherever I can, like, highlight that actually there's this first part of the whole process that user experience design is very much involved with, which is that understanding piece, that making sure that you really highlight the pain points and really highlight the needs of your users. And in the case of trading desktops and experiences, a lot of that is also about, workflow analysis, like I'm trying to understand what is it that functionally people are trying to do or traders are trying to do. They might be jumping across multiple different systems, and having a way to analyze all of that and understand where the particular nuances in that journey are causing significant pain is an exercise that helps you make sure you're actually building a good user experience. So
yeah. Would you agree with Stephen that the requirements of the desk need to be factored in as much as the requirements of the individual trader?
Yeah. And one thing I would add to that, Louis, because I think this is so important, is and especially with trading system, and is that I have been in so many meetings where we have two developers talking about a user, and I realize they're talking about a different user. So not having a UX person coming with actually even simple personas and saying, this is a sales trader, this is a trader. And so it's accelerate the development process, because actually, to me, like one of the things that UX design does very well is get everybody together to get to a shared understanding of what we're trying to build, and just coming with a even lo-fi like sketch of, oh, this is like dissipates so many problems going forward. And why is it even more important in trading system is quite often trading system have a very long release cycle for good reasons, right? We need this trading system to trade, and with the regression testing is incredibly rigorous, and it has to be. But so if you mess something up, it might not be a week or 2 weeks, it might be a month. Actually, with freezes, it may be 2 months before the next potential release. So getting it right to start with is extremely important. And I've seen both happen, right and not. So
yeah,
cool.
And just to add to that, it's an interesting point, Steve, because it's almost like you mentioned before about the, in the consumer world, we've got consumer applications, and it's a given that UX is important, but it's also, well ingrained that people can just ship stuff and then test and iterate and keep going and get feedback. Whereas in, the enterprise environment, and especially in the trading environment, it's potentially catastrophic
right.
consequences if you do that. So there's ways we can, like on the assumptions piece, I think there's various different ways that we can validate ideas or validate which direction we're going in and course correct without having to build up the whole system. There's prototyping techniques and things like that. But yeah, as you say, it's very important to get it right in the first place and save everybody time and pain and effort in the long run.
That's right.
Indeed. I'd quite like to look at our poll results now. The audience have been voting while we've been speaking. So if we could take just a quick look at this, and gents, is there any surprises here? Would this tie in with your own thoughts, Ivan? Any thoughts on these results?
Well, it seems like something we just been talking about, right? This lack of strategy and lack of planning before the actual implementation, stuff like that. So those surprises for me.
And same with Louis and Stephen. Any surprises there?
I think it's surprising and it's not surprising. I think it's surprising that people recognize that they need a UX strategy, because I think that's actually not a given understanding. I think a lot of people actually don't even recognize the value of UX in itself. So
yeah,
to see that people feel like that's something we're missing is actually quite promising in terms of their mindset.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think this is great that people want new strategy and actually are recognizing this is important, because certainly for a lot of my career, it's been, I'm not going to say it's been a dirty word, but let's put it this way. I've often tried to employ UX undercover without people knowing. So
Yeah.
good stuff.
Well, it's interesting because picking up on that, I mean, you've been in this industry a long time, Stephen. How has how have things evolved on the trading floor in the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever? I mean, do you think the UX is as relevant as it always was, or not?
I'm going to say it's probably more relevant now than ever. And one of the reasons I think that's the case is 10, 15 years ago, we basically had the trading, your OMS, your EMS, you had your position management, you had your CRM, and I'm going to say there was not a lot in between. What's really changed in the past 10, 15 years is the data. The amount of data and the amount of, we talk about, I'm going to say original AI and new AI, but it's like the capabilities that we have with the data and the insight we can have has grown exponentially. And suddenly, we have this data, where do we put it? And actually, in my experience, actually in the electronic trading world, it's been like, well, in your trading, like that's where the engineers were. That's where we had the budget. Let's put the data in there, whether it fits there or not. It's like a trader says, I need this, yes. And so I actually think that UX has degraded over the past 10 years. But certainly in our world, what's been happening is the pandemic hit and we went from 6 billion trades on the market to 10 billion daily, right? We just basically double on like overnight, and it's been staying that way. And so all the stuff that we put in trading, suddenly the trading engines can't cope, right? We have so much more data, so much more flow, so much more data. And what we're seeing now is actually we're starting to decouple. And there's a really good few fintechs out there that are putting good products out there that we can now think desktop centric as opposed to application centric. But that brings a lot of opportunities, and I'm very excited about that space, but also a lot of challenges. And this is where I think UX is get much more important. We have all the data we want, but a trader data need at 940 is very different from 430, even if it's the same underlying data set. So actually getting it right. So again, we think about the decision making, and from decision making to action is extremely important. And this is why I think UX is more important than ever.
Interesting. And I think that from the whole AI perspective, we've got a bunch of questions on that later on. But I mean, Louis, what are your thoughts on that, on how the trading floor's evolved and how important the UX is?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's even more important. I think especially interesting that we touch on, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit more further down the line, but especially as you've got, whole new capabilities with AI, there's definitely almost going to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we interact with technology, and that's obviously going to filter into enterprise, into trading in some way, shape, or form. I think it's one of those things where you don't ship something and then leave it and forget about it for 5-10 years. Like, people's needs are always changing. The world is always changing. Everything's always evolving. So you constantly need to be updating and refreshing whatever experiences it is that you are delivering. And so UX is always going to be front and center of that. It's the mechanism to make sure that you're understanding people and building the right things. So yeah, I think there's definitely been more of an awareness of what it is. Like I say, partly because of the consumer space, everyone's used applications on their phone and on their computer and expect a certain standard. But I think there's also been, cases where that value and benefit has been recognized. So that's slowly changed things over time. So I think it will continue to become more important in the future.
Yeah. And staying with that thought about the benefits and so on, I mean, could we drill down a little bit more, Louis, into what you see as some of the kind of the real operational and business benefits that a strong UX solution can deliver, and how?
I think sometimes it can be that there's a bit of a challenge creating that linkage, like in terms of a quantifiable value and benefit, and that's why it might not have been recognized early on. But I think now there's plenty of cases where you can, if you have a good framework in place, demonstrably show that this outcome was as a result of UX improvements. I mean, one simple one, like Steve mentioned earlier, is just time and effort. It's like a successful product or project being launched and not being used, but being spent, we spent a year or 2 years building it versus doing the time up front, making sure it's suits people's needs and is the right thing. Those two, edges of two sides of the different coin will clearly show that UX is valuable in that sense. But then there's also more quantifiable measures that you can start to capture. So, how many people are using things, what kind of aspects of the product are they using, what flows are they going through? Again, a lot of this is very mature in the sort of consumer side of technology, but it's something that can be brought into trading platforms and enterprise settings, and where you can really start to get quantifiable data metrics that show you this led to this.
I guess
Yeah,
metrics is an important point. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add to that is what's more important is obviously the trading, but the workflows around the trading, and whether it's with clients, risk. But those workflows can become important. And once you have those metrics, you actually see that on a desk with 15 people, 2 or 3 are using this workflow constantly. But the rest are kind of, so you see kind of a tail end of like, oh, we have like super users that are really using this. And, you go to the boss and say, should everybody be doing this? And like, well, yes. So what's happening there and what you invariably find is there's friction in the workflow. And so there's the really diligent people and they're doing it. But there's the people that, I'm not going to say less diligent, but they have their priorities elsewhere. And so the workflow is just complicated. And so these are great data points to kind of say, okay, well, how do we improve that workflow? And rather than seeing that kind of like curve flattening out a little bit, right? Where you see everybody starting to use this workflow more. So it's not in terms of how many users is not enough. It's like, oh, what is the comparison between one user and another on the same desk doing the same functions?
Yeah.
Ivan,
do you have any thoughts on that in terms of operational business benefits?
I don't think I have much to add to what already has been said, but maybe, for us, what we actually sort of look for when analyzing the effect of a change, it is usually this target action conversion. So, for example, for our platform, we measure, for example, what is the percentage of traders that have traded at all, like the first trade conversion, and how much time it usually takes for them to do so. So this kind of metrics, when you measure the conversion to some target action, is actually a good indicator whether the change has a positive or negative or neutral effect on the UX, to my understanding.
Yeah, so I guess they're clearly quantifiable metrics that you're looking at there. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, let's just pause things here for a second and look at our second poll, second audience poll, which you should see on the screen. So this is a multiple answer poll. So please choose as many of these responses as you wish. But which elements of UX design do you think are most crucial for a trading platform? User centricity, context awareness, consistency, speed and performance, and customizability. And I expect that the responses will depend upon the kind of traders that we're talking to and the kind of designers that we're talking to as well. But it'd be interesting to see which are the important ones here. So again, while the audience is answering that poll, Stephen, I'd like to come back to you. And again, drawing on your own experience here, what kind of steps does your team take to ensure that the user experience of a trading platform is aligned with both the trader needs and the business objectives? I know you've already spoken about this to a certain extent, but are there specific methodologies or frameworks that you rely on?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I kind of been trying to do UX on the ground a lot of my career, and to be clear, I have no UX people on my team, right? So, but I've been trying to kind of boil it down to the bare minimum so that we can start really delivering proper applications. And what I base everything on is the goal-directed design. I think Alan Cooper came up with that 10, 15 years ago. And what I tell my team is, one, walk the floor. That's the most important thing. Walk the flow. Know your users, and for some of them, it's uncomfortable. And to be honest, I always tell them this example. We did a kind of like a power on the desk. We're going to give them lots of tools. We sat down with 5 traders, came up with a bunch of stuff, and we started building it. And one day I'm on the head of the desk, and I just to him, and he just get a phone call, and he starts going into 3 or 4 different applications, and I'm like, hey, what was that, right? That's out there for me. It's like, oh, well, this is what I do 20 times a day. And I'm like, we've just been like days with your team and you, and this use case never came up. Never came up. And you know what? This use case was the top use case across everything that we built. So, talking to the user is one thing. Seeing what they do is much more important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So walking the flow, knowing your users, make sure that you're at the desk. And I tell my team, like, when they have an idea, they need to call you, right? You need to be the first person on the phone call when they have an idea. So walk the floor. Like, my team just now they're just like, oh, don't tell me. Just shut up. Name your user. It's very simple. Personas, and for us, I'm going to say it's going to be easier because we have traders, we have sales traders, and maybe you have but so we don't use persona. I'm not going to say we are, but name your user. Never call a user. A user is a banned word in my team. And the last thing is find the goal. What are they when they ask you a question? I want this piece of data. What is the goal? What is the ultimate goal? And I think the best technique for that, again, for our level, is the 5 whys. Keep asking why, and keep asking why until the trader is annoyed at you for asking why. And I have a great example where a trader asked me something, and I just went on why and why and why. And in the end, it's like, I just don't want my client to scream at me, right? And that was enlightening, because it's like, oh, really? The only thing this sales trader wants to do is cover his clients, right? He just wants to have the brain that has all data and all knowing on everything that's happening for his client's trade and everything around it. And you want to be able to ping his client whenever anything happens. That's what he wants. And it completely changed my way of designing things for this particular desk. So the 5 whys is great little, I'm going to say, hack, if I can say that way. So yeah, these are the things I tell my team to do. Cool.
Thank you. Let's have a look at the poll results for the elements of UX design. And by quite a long way, actually, the most important one is user centricity, and then speed and performance, context awareness, customizability, and consistency. Ivan, any surprises there?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, as Steven has just said, well, knowing your users and knowing their use cases is important, and it is important because, well, we're building these products for the users. So user centricity seems like a logical thing to keep at the top of the priority list, right?
Yeah. And Louis or Steven, would you agree with this kind of ranking?
Yeah, I would agree. I think Steven's just given a whistle-stop tour on like the fundamentals of that discovery piece of UX. I think walking the floor, this concept that people don't know what they don't know. Like in the discipline, we'll call it contextual inquiry. It's literally just being a fly on the wall. It's sitting there watching people and what they do. And I think under this user centricity piece, all of that applies. I think people recognize it's important, but then how you actually do that and effectively and objectively is a whole skill set in itself. A lot of the time people won't tell you what they need because they don't necessarily realize it themselves. So you need to tease it out of them with the right techniques and tools. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one thing. I might kind of I think consistency, especially now, is actually more important, and this is the reason I'm starting to talk about this. I'm glad I came last, actually, because for me, I don't need UI consistency in terms of, oh, they all look the same. Actually, I don't want them to look the same. I don't want my CRM to look the same as my OMS, as my risk UI, but the grid should function the same way. as I'm going from one grid to another around there, that's where the consistency is very important. And a grid where the filter is always on click and another grid where the filter is somewhere else is actually that's the friction that I want to get rid of. So actual consistency is I think very important in terms of not the look and feel, not the look, but the feel. That's what it is. And the other thing I would say too is, there's a company out there that does analytics that's on every trading desktop and does IM too. Every UX person that looks at that that I've talked to that looks at that company's software, the terminal, they hate it, absolutely hate it.
I can see why you're not naming
it. I will not name, but I try to replicate some of the usability features in that. The search is incredible and everybody uses them. That's consistency. Why would I implement a different kind of search when they've nailed it, right? So I think that's why I think consistency is actually much more important than a look. But I don't disagree with anything else. So.
Just to add in quickly on your point there, Steve, I think it's interesting because that's where design systems and design patterns really come into play. That's how you can, it's an important distinction. The interaction patterns versus the UI patterns is a good point, because the way that you interact with something, the way you apply a filter or the way you search versus how it looks are two different things, and ultimately you want to be able to interact with things in a consistent way. So design patterns and design systems are really good ways to embed that across your workflows.
Louis, would you be happy to walk us through a kind of recent project where you successfully implemented a new UX design for a trading platform, and just maybe talk through what were some of the major challenges and some of the key learnings?
Yeah, so I think we've covered quite a few. There's been quite a few really good examples up until this point. I think one of the most recent ones was less in the sort of vein of data. It was more for fund management use case, but what we were doing was building a analytics platform to help them make decisions about where to invest, and it kind of broke down whether they were different types of decisions they made, whether they made the money or lost the money in a more behavioral science way versus like your typical attribution lens. But what was important in that project, I think, was a lot of people on there were very experienced, had worked with fund managers for a long time, 10, 15, 20 years, had an idea of what fund managers needed to do and what was important to them. And one of the first things we did from a UX perspective was to actually just do some structured, moderated interviews with a few of our key clients, for them to just explain what is it that you do, what is it that you're trying to achieve, what are your goals, what are your pain points. And what that actually surfaced was, going back to this sort of workflow context, a lot of what we were thinking of initially was from a sort of very focused, this is a specific kind of product that we're trying to build. But when you talk to them about their actual workflow and explain their day-to-day, and they said, this is what I do and this is how I build my analytical models in Excel, and then I go over here into Microsoft OneNote, and then you started to get a picture of what their actual wider environment looked like, and then how you would actually plug your product into their workflow rather than just building this thing that served this one purpose. So then they open up conversations around, well, how can this thing be the center of the conversation, in their meetings, when they're having meetings with analysts and having meetings with the rest of the team, it could almost be this centerpiece. So you put it up and it spurs conversation and discussion. So those were kind of thoughts and angles that never would have been part of the conversation without that initial discovery piece, and it definitely added a whole new lens and context to most of the stakeholders involved. So that's one quick one that I can think of.
No, thanks for sharing. Appreciate that. Ivan or Stephen, Ivan, do you have any recent projects that you'd like to highlight, or and any kind of key learnings from those?
Sure. Before that, I just wanted to say that I really admire these people capable of interviewing people properly without extracting insights from this interview without putting words into us as a people. So it's a cool thumbs up.
So that's one of the
Well,
that's one of the key things, I guess, when
yes,
you're going
yes.
through that design process. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So for us, I just wanted to tell you about this bank from North America that approached us. They wanted a trading platform, several new features, custom design, and accessibility was really important for them. So much so that we had to hire an external team of consultants to help us to build it in a way that it would be compliant with all this W3C guidelines and the client's requests. We've reworked so many elements. We've added localization to different languages, keyboard input, screen reader, like you name it. And I remember particularly that we had to change a lot because according to these guidelines, you cannot indicate a change of state of an element just by using its color. You have to have something else. And so both the development and design teams, they worked really hard to meet all the requirements. And now we have this changes, these insights used in the base platform. So as for the challenges, I think that this this research actually required to ensure the best UX and comply with accessibility guidelines and user requests is challenging and time consuming and resource consuming. And you, by the way, have to have it all wrapped into a nice UI. So
Yeah.
managing it all is challenging.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions around AI and Gen AI. That I think this is probably going to be your area of expertise here, Ivan. But I'd be interested to get the thoughts from Stephen and Louis as well. But Ivan, I mean, staying with you, with AI and Gen AI becoming increasingly prevalent in trading technology, how do you see AI and Gen AI enhancing the user experience of trading platforms? And again, if you can share any kind of metrics or examples that demonstrate the impact of those AI apps and so on.
Well, yeah, gladly. So first of all, the most common way to utilize AI in a trading workflow that would affect UX is to integrate a conversational assistant into a trading platform, to my understanding. And since we're building such a platform, I can tell you about our own observations. And this is platform DevX that I told you about before. One of the tasks it's assigned to is to carry out the KYC process for the traders. And since DevX has started doing it, we noticed that, well, conversion to field KYC has increased. And as I already mentioned, overall, this target action conversion is really something that we're looking into. And so this is one metric, I guess. And because of DevExa being this first line of support for traders, and because it having this user experience personalization functionality where we can recommend instruments to be added to a watch list or re-rank their news feed, I guess they feel more taken care of and listened to, which leads to increased engagement and activity. That's also one. And overall, we see that this average user satisfaction score that we collect after each interaction with the assistant has increased compared to what it was before integrating it with AI and this conversational capabilities. So I think, yes, it's safe to say that AI can positively affect user experience.
Yeah, and can you comment on any kind of prominent misconceptions around AI and Gen AI that you've observed among clients as you've been designing these user experiences?
Yeah. So I guess a common misconception is that AI can be given any task and it would handle it because of this recent hype around this conversational assistants again and ChatGPT. Sometimes people think that you can entrust it with anything and it will handle it and it's not always the case. They're not always as consistent and reliant as we'd want them to be. Also, I guess underestimating running costs for such solutions. It's something that we see a lot. They actually can be, as I once heard, eye-watering, this running costs, and yeah, it's important to take them into account. Also, underestimating running effort, actually, that is also something, because people think that it's a plug and play solution and you've deployed it and it's done. But usually, like pretty much all the time, you need to maintain it, you need to customize it to your specific case. So it's an important part of the overall integration.
Thank you. Louis, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I think the whole AI conversation is an interesting one. It's almost like we've had, like, as a collective selective amnesia, and everyone's acting as if we never used AI before. But now, AI has been used for a long time. It's been around for a while, but obviously this new wave has opened up a whole bunch of possibilities. It's interesting because from a experience, or I guess interface perspective, one of the, like, comforting ways or default things that people go to is like a chat interface. And actually, when ChatGPT was first released, they just cobbled together this chat interface just as a way to demo the capabilities of the model itself. So it's not necessarily the best way to interact with the models. That there's going to be a whole bunch of different ways and paradigms that we could use to interface with the underlying capability. So I think that's one thing to just be mindful of in general. Like, I think there's a lot of use cases where this conversational approach works pretty well. But also a bunch of other use cases where it's probably easier to just have a more traditional interface or some other way of interacting entirely. And then the other aspect, I think, would be the generative nature of a lot of the models, LLMs that are coming out now, poses a bit of a challenge with the predictability of outputs and how you can, I guess, harness those outputs in a way that's, in high stakes environments like trading is a bit more predictable, and you don't end up costing yourself billions of dollars or whatever. So it's definitely a very interesting space, and I think all of those challenges and caveats are things that need to be explored from a user-centric perspective, and making sure that it's not a solution in search of a problem, and it's actually one possible solution to a problem out of potentially many.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I think for me, actually, my strategy on UX hasn't changed at all with Gen AI. I still want to have no friction between decision making and action. It's just that now we have that much more power potentially, but I'm still trying to facilitate workflow. I'm still talking about humans here. Once Gen AI takes over, it'll be a different story. But until then, human to technology, actually nothing changes. We just have much more, but how do we implement it in a way that is just seamless is really a big challenge. Because you're right, it's like, oh, we can do this, let's do that. Yeah, and actually that doesn't fit my workflow. Now, some of it we may gain by coming out of the workflow the way it is now, and then we can reintegrate it later. So we may have path to where we want to go, but certainly nothing changes for me, right? I'm trying to really make our traders and sales traders superhumans, right? That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and talking about the human element, I mean, kind of in the context of like AI and Gen AI, what steps could trading platforms take to kind of maintain a balance between the automation side of things and the human element, within the UX? Is that something you've got a view on, Ivan?
Yeah, I think so. Finding a balance is always challenging, and I think here we first need to, well, again, realize that we can't, it should not outsource everything to AI and automate everything. So I'd start by searching this key points of interaction between the users and the platform, and that is something that Louis was referring to before. And I would decide whether to automate some specific part of the user experience case by case. For example, you could decide that, well, you want to have this first line of support built around this Gen AI, for example, technology, right? But you still want to decide that although you're okay with outsourcing KYC handling with this assistant, you are not okay with allowing users to manage their accounts somehow with the technology. Maybe because of the lack of predictability and control over the output or anything else, but it's a case-by-case situation. So for the use cases where we actually decided to use automation, to use this AI technology, I think there must be a way to revert back what we've already done with AI and or fall back to a human. That's important. And also, I guess, realization that it's an iterative process. So we have to monitor how it's doing and decrease somehow the level of automation if it's needed.
Yeah. Gotcha. So we're now about 10 minutes to go, and there's a bunch of audience questions that have come through. And I think some of these might have been asked before, a little bit earlier on, because I think we've covered quite a few of these. I don't know if we can get some of these questions up on the screen. But let me see. How do you gather feedback from traders to ensure that UX is meeting their needs? I think to a large extent, we've covered that. How do you ensure that UX improvements are compatible across multiple devices and platforms, such as desktops, tablets, and mobile devices? We haven't talked about that too much. I think that's quite an interesting point, especially these days with more and more home working going on. Anybody got any views on that one? How do you ensure that UX improvements are compatible across multiple devices and platforms?
I can speak to that one a little bit. I think it's interesting because I think that the more complex the thing is that you're trying to do tends to be that the less appropriate like a mobile device is or something smaller. So a lot of the time for like power users or people who are trying to do really, really complex tasks, mobile almost doesn't come into the equation a lot of the time. But then there are certain scenarios where it does. But in general, having a practice of considering formats across different devices. So you can, for example, have a mobile first approach where you start with this is what it would look like on mobile, this is what it would look like on tablet, and this is what it would look like on desktop. It's one thing visually, it's another thing once you start to get into interactions. And if you're doing things like you got loads of charts and you're trying to interrogate data, then some of those interactions become a bit niftier on mobile devices, and you almost need a completely different paradigm. So I think it's really important to determine how much you would need, say, for example, mobile to be part of the strategy. And then because it can be deceptively time consuming and a fair amount of effort to try and actually make it work on those different formats. But I think obviously the world is moving towards this context where a lot of people are on their phones. You've got newer generations coming up who are like mobile native, and they've literally used phones more than they've used desktops. So that will come into play. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, but also that it's not always straightforward to balance the two. So
yeah, I wonder if this complexity of the process criteria is something related to the generation that we come from, because I'm for example, one of those people who wouldn't do a big purchase using my mobile phone, only using desktop. So maybe, although it's okay for younger people, so it's interesting how it changes over time.
Yeah. Indeed. Another question from the audience, and this is an area that we haven't really covered yet, but how can UX design be leveraged to ensure that users can easily meet regulatory and compliance requirements without compromising the overall user experience? I'll come to you on that one, Stephen.
Yeah, actually, that is key, and that is one part of my process whenever I design anything substantial, is I get legal and compliance in the room, literally as we know what we're going to do. So they're one of the stakeholders at the very beginning. In trading, quite often we tend to kind of bring them on later, but actually they need to be in, even if they're not sure about the legal and compliance aspect of things and how things are going to change, getting them involved at the beginning of the design process is extremely important, because effectively that can completely change the design that we're doing based on some of the legal and regulatory requirements that we have. So they're getting them involved as early as possible in the process is what I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I can see you nodding along with that, Louis. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the engineering conversation, that there's the earlier you can bring different stakeholders in, the more you can get contributions from them. So on the engineering side, like the more likely you'll know how feasible something is that you're trying to do. Obviously, there's a balance. You don't want to derail something before it's even taken off, but yeah, getting them involved earlier rather than at the end where it's a bit too late is definitely.
And there's a question. I don't know if you have kind of specific information on this, but which applications do you use to gather data, like user pain points from your products, for example, post-hog? I mean, you talked about walking the floor and kind of seeing what traders are doing and having the conversations, but in terms of actually gathering data regarding their pain points, are there any particular applications that any of you use for that?
I think there's a few. I guess it depends what you're trying to do. There's a bunch of sort of analytics vendors, like so things like Adobe Analytics or similar to Adobe Analytics, but you can also get a bunch of open source ones where you can effectively build those metrics yourself. But I guess Ivan probably has. You guys have implemented it, so you probably have some thoughts on it as well.
Well, yeah, I believe that we have a homegrown system for this, and I think the main idea for these guys that work on it is to find points on of the user journey when we can see the drop for the conversion to the next stage somehow, or we can monitor the time that they spend on at each specific stage to find out what they're struggling with. These are, I guess, the most important things. These are not always about how to say helping the user to reach this aha moment when they are actually doing what they've come here to do, but first handling those pain points where they struggle with the interface with the solution is the most important. And yes, this analytic systems can be of a much help here.
Right.
Yeah, on my side, very quickly, because again, a lot of these systems are kind of, I'm going to say, consumer focused. We implement something very simple on our side, because also we have website, we also have all different languages. We need something that was agnostic, but also every product has different KPIs. There are different workflows that you want, different interests. So we didn't want the granularity of everything. So it's really at the product launch, and every time we do a new feature, what do we want to track on this? And so we have a very simple API where you can just call it, very flexible, and you can put anything you want in there. So so that we can track our analytics for that really dedicated to each system, and actually hops in between systems.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that just on that point, Steve, I think that's the key thing, is like having an overarching KPI that you're tracking.
Yeah,
How you do that is another thing, but you need to know what you're targeting. So I think that's a really good point.
So very, very quickly, because we're coming into our last minute now, so I'd like a fairly rapid answer to this one. But what measurable benefits have you actually seen and experienced from investing in an optimal UX solution? Stephen, you first.
So error reduction, like literally no errors. Then when we use a few adoption across the desk of all of the workflows, the tide rises all boats kind of thing. These are two main ones I can say in these 20 seconds I have, or whatever.
Great, thank you, Ivan.
Well, I guess we can use some of the product metrics for this, for example, retention and user lifetime. So it's hard to isolate the effect of one specific change on these metrics, but this can help to, well, get a grasp on how it affects the UX overall.
Thank you. And Louis, measurable benefits that you've seen?
Yeah, just a mixture of all those, really. There's lots of different ways that I've seen it benefit. Everything from, adoption to, as Steve mentioned, reduction in errors, reduction in, overheads or cost or time taken to do things. I think there's just a myriad of different things that you can benefit from having that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we've reached the end of the hour, so thank you, all of you, Ivan, Louis, and Stephen, for a really interesting and informative discussion. And a special thank you to DevExperts for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we close, just again, a quick mention of the event we've got coming up in February 2025, which is the Trading Tech Summit in London at the Hilton Canary Wharf. We've got various webinars that are coming up, which you'll see on the webpage for Trading Tech Insight. And so if you're interested in joining any of these upcoming events, just go along to the events page on our website or the webinars page, and then you can join from there. So that's it for today. So thank you again to Stephen, Louis, and Ivan, and thanks to DevExperts. And thank you to all of you, the audience, for taking part in today's webinar. It's been a good one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.